credibility, there had not been a tradition in the Islamic scholars, cut around the scholar, about making sense to one's own, given that the religion in the final analysis is the relationship between the person and God. We have not grown that capacity, that experiential capacity for people to say, I wonder as a Muslim whether what you are saying and related to the Prophet or anything else makes sense to me. That's not encouraged, it's not done, it's not said. As a result, it's very difficult, even in a place of hard learning like MIT, it's very difficult to find someone standing in your place and bringing 20, 30 hadith, mixing them up, and giving them to people for multiple choice, or true false. And we'll give you a hadith written you that makes sense to you or not. And then at the end, reveal which one is stronger, which one is not. And if we do that over time, at least it will help people have some capacity to distinguish at the end of the test why it makes sense, why it does not make sense, and can we discuss that, can we grow up from here, trying to learn ourselves, as opposed to always heavily relying on a lecture format of someone who tells me, who himself may or may not be reliable.
I mean, ultimately, yes, religion is a personal issue, and I think that all Muslims should be convinced of what they believe. And if they're not convinced of what they believe, they should ask themselves if they really want to believe this. And I think that people should demand that of their religion. But, I mean, like any field, you don't just have your own, you don't just go and tell somebody to take a certain drug if you're not a doctor. Every field has scholars who know about it, and if you want to be convinced of something, you should go to people who know about it, and they can give you an argument. And if you're still not convinced, you say, you haven't convinced me. I don't buy this. Then ahlan wa sahlan, you're free to have that opinion. Because this person is either not convinced you out of there because the argument is bad, or because this person hasn't done a good job of presenting the argument. So in the end, in Islam, you have to have proof. Everything is about proof. If you don't have proof, you don't have something. But that doesn't mean that you just sit by yourself and read a book of Hadith and say, I'm not convinced of something. Because, I tell people a lot that if you want to know what's right and what's wrong as a Muslim on a daily basis, don't read a book of Hadith. Hadith it's not, it would be like, imagine someone trying to figure out what you think is what's right and what's wrong by collecting everything you've said in a 10-year period. And you might say all sorts of random stuff that's out of context or is specific to one person and not another person. And the worst way in the world for me to try and figure out what you think is right and wrong is to go to that without any kind of training, without any knowledge of. I need to look at what generally this guy is thinking and where he's coming from and things like that. So opening a book of Hadith and just looking through it is a bad way to try and figure out how to live as a Muslim. You really should ask a scholar who can help interpret this material for you.
But I'm talking about the capacity to grow that
critical
individual capacity to judge on one's
and this is
it's not part of the Islamic tradition in the prophets.
No, I understand. There's a lot of tension in the Hadith tradition about this. There's hadiths from the Prophet in Musnad Ahmed and Kifaya al-Khatib and Sa'az Tawaqat, Musnad al-Bazar, Sahih ibn Hibban, that إذا سمعتم الحديث عني تعرفه قلوبكم وتلين له أبشاركم وشعركم وترون أنه منكم قريب فأنا أولى به منكم وإذا سمعتم عني الحديث تقشعر منه جلودكم وتتغير له تقشعر منه جلودكم وتتغير له قلوبكم وترون أنه منكم بعيد فأنا أبعدكم منكم. If you hear a hadith from me that you feel comfortable with, it makes sense to you, your heart is sort of at ease with it, and you think that it's something I would say, then I said this. And if you hear something that's negative and makes you cringe, makes your skin crawl, I didn't say this. I'm further away from this than you are. Okay? But so there's a sense of use your brain. If someone comes to you and tells you something about the Prophet, don't just don't just use your brain when you're trying to figure out, does this make sense? Does it seem good or bad? But there's also these very important principle that it's been Ali bin Abi Talib and Ibn Abbas said, and this is widespread amongst all the Sunni schools that I know of, use this principle, which is إذا حدثتم بالحديث عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فَظَنُّ بِهِ مَا هُوَ أَحْيَى وَمَا هُوَ أَتْقَى وَمَا هُوَ أَهْدَى. If you are told a hadith from the Prophet of God, peace be upon him, then think the best of it. I mean, look at it in the best way. Think of what's the most pious, the most, the best guided way to look at this hadith. Don't just, if you hear something and it seems bad to you, don't just assume that the Prophet meant something bad. Maybe it's taken out of context or it's a specific case. So, yeah, we're encouraged to use our reason to examine reports that come to us. We can't just automatically close the door on them. We have to think, wait a second, maybe we're looking at this in the wrong way. And that tension is actually at the heart of the whole Islamic tradition. And that's what Islamic thought and Islamic law and everything is about, is trying to take all the stuff we have from God, from the Prophet, and fit it together and figure out how we would be Muslims. And in the Muslim populace, yes, they should do this. Their brain should be turned, the wheels should be turning. But they themselves, I don't think a normal person, just like in any profession, a normal person can't have an authoritative opinion. They need to go to people who know what they're talking about. And if the person doesn't convince you, then the hell with it. Yes?
How do we compromise between reason and submission? Sometimes a lot of the hadith or the tradition in general may not make sense to us, or we may not accept it with our thoughts and personalities, but we practice some ijtihad. We do find out that is what we read or heard is true, does come from the Prophet, and still doesn't convince us, but we have to accept it. How do we compromise? I mean, I can give you an example. I was talking to my husband about corporal punishment with children, and I feel very strong